So first a story. When I was in Ben Salem at TI, we sent a lot of kids to Ramah Poconos. And if you've been to Jewish summer camp, a lot of times if they do Havdalah, they do it by the lake, if they have a lake. So I was doing a Havdalah program at the shul, and one of my kids, the Hebrew school, who were at Ramah, said, "Rabbi Sachs, you can't do Havdalah here." I said, "Why not?" "There's no lake." Havdalah literally means to distinguish between something and something else. We distinguish between Shabbat and weekday. Now, the truth is, Havdalah is merely a ceremony. We really end Shabbat, first of all, when the stars come out, which is already a while ago, or if you're doing the Mari service, in the Amida, there's a paragraph which says we now transfer over to a weekday. So Havdalah can really be done, the rabbis say, until Tuesday. I was mentioning to someone that we lived in Calgary, and in the summertime, because Calgary is very far north and on the edge of the mountain time zone, Shabbat isn't over in June until 11:30 at night. So our kids would already be asleep by the time Havdalah came around. We did Havdalah in Calgary that time, always on Sunday morning. So you can do it almost any time. And it's really the way it's constructed is very logical. How do we start Shabbat? Light candles, right? That's how Shabbat starts. How do we end Shabbat? We light candles. Even though it's one candle, as you know, it has to have at least 2 wicks, right? So you start Shabbat lighting candles, you end Shabbat lighting candle. You start Shabbat with Kiddush, bracha over wine, grape juice. You end with bracha over wine and grape juice. Shabbat starts, there's 2 interpretations for the spices. One is that the wonderful smells coming out of the kitchen. Shabbat is a special day, so you have those wonderful smells, and so you smell something sweet to remind you of the sweetness of Shabbat. But also, it's very interesting. Usually when you have spices, it's usually in a container. It can be any kind of container, fancy or not. Why? And it has holes in it. Because the spices, right, you can't see them technically, but you can smell them. They're there, even though you can't see it. And that's Shabbat. Shabbat you can't touch. It's a period of time. So you know Shabbat is there. And so the way you observe Shabbat makes Shabbat special. So it's really a fascinating idea as to how we end Shabbat with Havdalah. If you would please rise and turn to page 283. We'll start singing Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet. Elijah was told by God, because Elijah was sort of bummed out by the fact that the Israelites during his reign of being a prophet, they weren't following the ways of the Torah. And he says to God, Elijah, he says, God, I'm not so sure we're going to make it. I'm not so sure that we're going to survive because people are not looking in the right direction. The Havdalah in that Siddur, I don't have it in front of me. Let me look. I'll tell you in a second. If someone knows the right page, yell it out. It's probably 270-something maybe, or no, probably something different. Nope. I don't have that Siddur in front of me. Yeah, it looks like you'll have is it the weekday Siddur you have, or the Shabbat? It's weekday. What did it say? No, it's not. It's probably the table of contents. I'm sorry, I didn't realize. 155? 165, okay. So Elijah is told by God, God says, I'm going to make sure that when you die, your spirit is going to be present at the 2 times when Jews really care about their Judaism. And you'll see that our people are going to survive. And those 2 times are at the Passover Seder, right? Remember, we opened the door for Elijah. And also at a bris. We have a kisei shel Eliyahu. We have a chair. It doesn't have to be a fancy chair, although in some cultures, if you go to Jewish Museum, American Jewish History Museum in downtown, you'll see one. A beautiful chair that the Sandek holds the baby in his lap for the bris. the chair of Elijah. So Elijah's present. And then we also sing Elijah the prophet, because if everyone observes Shabbat and the spirit of Shabbat, then perhaps the Messianic era will come, say the rabbi. So that's why we sing Eliyahu Hanavi before we do Havdalah. So let's begin. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu Hagiladi, Bimhera v'yameinu. This doesn't work. Yavo eleinu, Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben David. Well, we'll keep singing until we get a match. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu. Ah, there you go. Well, now we have a job for you to be the lighter of the lights here at the synagogue. Thank you. So I have one of these too. I thought I knew how to use it, but I guess not. Okay. Hine Yoshua Tiaftach v'lo Efchad Ki Yozi v'zimad Yaronai v'ayil Yeshua Ushavtem Mayim Yosem Yeshua L'Adonai Yeshua Amcha v'rechatecha Sela Adonai tzevod imanu misgav lanu Elohei Yaakov Sela Adonai tzevod asher adam b'teach pach Adonai Hoshia Melchin Aviyam Kareinu La Yehudim Hayata Ora Chabzam Yikar Kain Dielanu Kos Yeshua Asav Hashem Adonai Akra Lai 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 Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Borei Peri Hagafen Borei Peri Hagafen Amen Lai 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 Ya Lai 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 Ya Lai 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 Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Borei Minei Samim Borei Minei V'Samim Amen Lai 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 Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Borei Miorei Ha'esh Borei Miorei Ha'esh Amen Lai 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 Ya Lai 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 Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Hamavdil Ben Kodesh Lechol Ben Or Lechoshech Ben Yisrael La'amim Ben Yom Hashvi'i L'Sheshet Yemei Hamaseh Baruch Ata Adonai Hamavdil Ben Kodesh Amen Lai 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 La 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 la. Shavuatov, 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 everyone. Good vach. I think we now have food, right? We always have food. What? Yeah, we're done. Yeah, that's it. We're done.
So folks in the room, I invite you to have a drink, and we're going to take about a 15-minute break, 20-minute break, and then Rabbi Sachs and I are going to come back on the beam and have a little conversation and answer some questions. So for those that are streaming at home, give us about 15, 20 minutes.
Sure, okay. Please turn to whatever page you see. I don't have that Siddur. Okay. And everyone can be seated except those who have a yortzeit or observing a yortzeit, mourning for mourner's Kaddish. Yit gadal v'yit kadash shemei rabbah. Amen. Yalma divarach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei. V'chayecho nuviyomecho nuv'chaye dechol beit Yisrael. Ba'gala v'zman kari v'imru. Amen. Yehei shemei rabbah mevarach. Li'olam ulomei olmaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnasei. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yithalal. Shemei dekudisha barichu. Li'ela minko birchata v'shirata. Tush bechata v'nechemata. Da'amiran b'yalma v'imru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya. V'chayim aleinu v'yal kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav. Hu ya'aseh shalom aleinu. V'yal kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Okay. Let's retire to the lobby for some refreshments.
we can finish it after. We'll finish it after. What? No. Rabbi Sachs, thank you so much for joining us this weekend.
I'm happy to be here.
It's been great to get to know you more. I know a lot of our congregants had a chance to get one-on-one and chat with you a little bit. This gives us another opportunity to talk a little bit, ask you some questions, and of course, streaming for those that are unable or that can't be here. As part of our congregational survey, our community was really clear that they want a rabbi that gets to know them, right? That knows their name, that knows who they are, and can engage with them individually, one-on-one. What would be your strategy to get to know our congregation?
Yeah. So what I've mentioned already, I think, to the committee, is that what I've done in many congregations is, and again, we could do it even on Zoom if we couldn't do it in person. I like to arrange, with the help of lay people, parlor meetings where I'll go to homes once a week after the holidays are over, of course, and have the people arrange to have their friends from the synagogue come. 8, 10, 12 people, have coffee and cake, and then just go around the room so I can meet everyone, listen to your stories, where you grew up, who you are, play Jewish geography a little bit. And then what I do is say, okay, talk to me. What can the synagogue do for you that it's not doing now that we can be of help with? Do you have any issues that you think need to be addressed? So it's a more proactive way, because the truth is, and any rabbi will tell you exactly the same thing as I'm saying right now, if we don't sit back and do this proactively, the only way you get to know the rabbi is either you come to services, a good deal, you attend one of his or her classes, you have a bar bat mitzvah, but unfortunately the biggest way is through death. Because when someone dies, the rabbi comes over, he speaks with you, he or she figures out a eulogy with you, tries to help you learn, comes to the shiva, checks up on you. And so that's a surefire way of getting to know people. It's unfortunate it's during a sad time. So that's why I like to be proactive. It's sort of like, I remember in a number of my shuls, even in Ben Salem, where everybody was literally under the age of 40 practically, I did a whole thing on the Jewish approach to death and dying. And some of the people said, what are you doing? We're going to be around. I said, yeah, but how about your parents? How about your grandparents? Right? You're going to be, and in your life, you're going to mourn. You're going to have this. It's going to happen. It may not happen right away, thank God. But you should know what our customs are, why we do what we do. So right now, it's an academic exercise, but it could be something that really helps your life. And I had a great attendance because I framed it in such a way saying, it's not just the rabbis figure, what can I teach? Oh, I'll teach something about the Midrash or Talmud. This is real serious stuff, and it's, as we call it, tachlis. So the same thing with meeting people proactively, and I've done this even in Queens during the pandemic. In fact, it gave me more time because nobody was going anywhere. No one said, well, I'm going to be out at the opera or I'm going to the whatever. Everybody's home. And not so much anymore, but in the first year or two. So I did a lot of that during that first year or so of the pandemic. Everybody was home. We used Zoom, and I get to, and it's a lot of fun. Tell us where you're from, and what do you do, and why you live here, and that sort of thing. And then I go around the room, and I talk about me just a little bit. And then I say, okay, so let's get serious for a moment and say, what can the synagogue do for you? Now, truthfully, we also talked about the pandemic because that was on everyone's mind. And that's natural. So normally you're not going to talk about something like that. But even though we still, and I understood there was a need to get younger people involved. Again, the congregation is mostly over the age of 70. It's just the demographics. But we found just one young couple that came to us. They both went to JTS. They're both public school teachers in Forest Hills, where they live. And they came to the closest conservative synagogue. That was small. There's a big one. They didn't want to go to the big one. And it was great. Got to meet him. In fact, the woman, her grandfather, was a colleague of my father-in-law. And he was the president of the RA the 2 years before my father-in-law was the president. So we were very good friends. So anyway, and we started to touch Shabbat. And she and another young couple in the synagogue who had been there for a number of years reached out to their friends. And now we have like 10 couples. They have a whole program every month. They have someone help them run a program for all the, and their little ones, adorable, and they have a touch Shabbat. So, that came out of one of these meetings, and the word got around. So that's what I would do proactively to meet people. It took me 2 years in Calgary, but they had 800 families, so it was a whole bit different than this congregation. So I would do that right away after the holidays, and I would need a lay person or lay people to sort of reach out to everyone in the congregation, even people who aren't, don't come a lot, and say, hey, you want to meet Rabbi Sachs? Why don't you get together, and here's a list of people who belong to this. Some of these people. It's better if they all know each other, not have to be close friends, but if they all know each other, that helps break any kind of tension or people who may be a little bit shy. So that would be my approach.
Rabbi Sachs, you mentioned, I think your father-in-law, you've told us your connections to Beth Tikva and B'nai Jeshurun. This might be a nice opportunity to share it with a broader audience.
Sure.
Those that are here and are streaming, so I think it'd be wonderful to hear
Yeah,
about.
thank you. So I grew up in Mount Airy, about a mile from here, off of Ivy Hill Road, 8600 Rugby. I'm staying at the Chestnut Hill Hotel, right next to my old elementary school, Jenks. That's a trip. We left Mount Airy in 1972, and I think in 74 maybe is when the synagogues merged. My father-in-law was here in 59 to 68, 69. Meira remembers, she's the oldest of the 4 kids, remembers growing up here. They stayed until actually 69, even though he, I think, wasn't the rabbis then, but he was a Camp Ramah as a director, and then they tried to make Aliyah, didn't quite work out. We wound up in New Jersey in 72. So I feel a connection. But let me tell you something about my father-in-law, who I worship. I mean, that's all I can put it. He was an amazing man. He was one of the very few rabbis I know, or even knew, who not only, being a rabbi, was a Camp Ramah director, he was international US-wide director for a while, and worked with college youth. He also had a PhD, which he did part-time, what was called dropsy in those days. In fact, funny story, when Netanyahu, Bibi, was the ambassador to Israel, UN, as you all know, Bibi grew up in Cheltenham. In fact, one of my friends, Archie Ruberg, who's a colleague and was a Ramah director, went to Hebrew school with Bibi many, many years ago. Anyway, I remember my father-in-law telling me, he says, oh, Moshe, he said, look out for this guy. I know his dad. His dad taught at dropsy when I was there. He's a real right-winger. And he was right. Anyway, but he was a scholar. He was on the law committee he was actually even considered when Gerson Cohen retired in the mid-'80s to be the chancellor, but he refused to even entertain it. He said didn't want to do that. But he also fought for social justice. He marched in the 60s with King in Selma and Montgomery. Now I have to tell you, and it's not terrible to say that there were members of this congregation who are no longer here, because it was a long time ago, who were not happy that he did that. They thought he was a rabble-rouser. He counseled against the Vietnam War. Also, people were not happy about that. But he lived his conscience. And in fact, we sort of laugh. He thought it was very cool, and he was proud of being arrested after he chained himself to the Russian embassy in New York when he fought for Soviet Jews. So his story, and he used to go to Schechter when Ari and Rachel were in Schechter, when they were in first, second, third grade, on Martin Luther King Day, and talk to the kids about his experiences, in a childlike way, in Selma and Montgomery. And of course, his grandkids were very proud of that. And he was an inspiration. If you talk to anyone in the Rabbinical Assembly who's over the age of 55, there's still a lot of us around, they will say, oh, Alex Shapiro, he not only did that, he actually changed the whole way the Rabbinical Assembly worked to make it more rabbi-friendly. Now that sounds crazy, right? It's for the rabbis. Well, like any organization, it had sort of cronyism at the top, and if you knew someone, you could do okay. But if you were a sort of a rabbi just around, he made it more democratic, and it's changed dramatically since he initiated that change in the mid-'80s. He also was, just coincidence, he was the Rabbinical Assembly president when Amy Eilberg, who's a high school friend of mine and was my Israeli dance partner in USY, was ordained as the first woman rabbi from JTS in '85. So that was interesting as well. But I don't want to sound spooky. I channel him. I think about him. I feel his presence. I always say, what would he say? What would he do? One time I went against his advice, and I told you this. is that when I was the Rav HaMachshir for the Rabbinical Assembly in Philadelphia, he said, "What are you doing? Are you crazy?" Because it was a hard job, and it was difficult dealing with caterers and other places, but I felt it was important to do it, and I did a good job, and I expanded it, so one time we disagreed. So anyway, being in this congregation, even though it looks so much different than when he was here, obviously, is almost a fulfillment of a dream that that his presence is still here somehow, and I'm so influenced by what he did and what he taught us. And even my Ari and Rachel, who are old enough to remember him, and Ari especially, in fact, Ari, who went to rabbinical school, totally without our knowledge. I mean, he just I said, "By the way, I'm going to this JTS as a rabbi, going to study Bible." I said, "What?" He said, "Because I felt Saba was sort of calling to me and saying, that's what you should do." It blew us away. So anyway, that's sort of my story here, the connection with the congregations, and also, with Beth Tikva especially.
That's a great connection, from our past, so it's good to hear about it. Our congregation is very diverse. We have a wide array of kind of Jewish observance. We have congregants who are connected to Orthodoxy, conservatism, Reconstructionism, Reformism. We all kind of bond together in this eclectic mix here. What would you do as a rabbi to kind of meet each one of them kind of where they are?
So the one thing I've always been taught, and I believe in, is that, and the difference between an Orthodox and a non-Orthodox rabbi of any denomination, is that we believe in pluralism. That is, if there's another denomination, Reconstructionist, Reform, whatever it may be, we may not quite agree with them philosophically, but it's fine. They have a different point of view. So what? So I have, in my own family, a lot of rabbis. I have a son and a brother-in-law who are conservative rabbis. I have a son-in-law who's a Reform rabbi, and my two brothers are Orthodox rabbis. And, of course, Rabbi Shapiro was a conservative rabbi. So I pride myself on being pluralistic, on being innovative, on being where people are. I don't have I'm ideological conservative. I mean, I really believe in the conservative movement and what it stands for, and I believe being in the middle is the best place to be. But by the same token, through my own experience as a father-in-law of a Reform rabbi, who's on the traditional side, he and Rachel keep kosher. Yet at the same time, there's things they do differently, and that's okay. So we'll meet people where they are. I will always like to explain my point of view. Obviously, the basic ideas of kashrut and Shabbat, I try to follow and have the congregation follow the guidelines of the conservative movement in terms of Shabbat and kashrut, right? But there is room for flexibility. And it depends on the situation. So I can't answer it specifically, but it's when everything comes up, we'll have to talk about it, and there are issues that will come up, and we'll have to figure out together. What I don't do is say, "Hey, I'm the rabbi and you're not," meaning that, I just say what goes and you have to follow me. No, that's not the way. Any good rabbi would never do that, even to the congregation that may be more homogeneous, because you have to have buy-in from the congregation. You'll have to have people that are, saying, "Okay, this makes sense. Let's try this," if it's something new, for example. So that's who I am.
So support for Israel is important to our congregation, of course. I'm sure it is to all the congregations you've been at before. What are some ways you've helped members in the past engage with Israel and support Israel and find a love for it?
Well, I talk about Israel, not so much politically, because, politics is politics. I wouldn't get involved with that. About the country, about the culture. My wife and I go to Israel every year. When I do retire eventually, we want to live in Israel. Whether we can, we'll have to see. But Israel is so important to us. Now, as I said, the Shapiros, after they left the area, tried to make Aliyah. So Meira and all the kids went to Israeli schools. Meira to high school, Adina and Avi to a middle school, and Nomi, who was very young, to an elementary school. They all speak fluent Hebrew. In fact, Meira, it's an interesting story. The Shapiros raised their kids in Hebrew. They spoke only Hebrew to their kids for the first couple of years of their lives. They learned English from other people, from television, whatever it was. And Meira spoke beautiful Hebrew, but when she got to high school, she spoke Americanized Hebrew. Her accent, well, of course, they made fun of her. So she very quickly learned how to speak Israeli pronunciated Hebrew. It's called the miftah. And it gets us in trouble. Why? Because when we leave the country and we go through passport control, when she speaks in Hebrew, the person says, "Where's your passport, your Israeli passport?" And she says, "I don't have one." And they don't believe her. So they spend 15 minutes checking the records to see if she's lying or not, because if you're an Israeli, you are required by Israeli law to use your Israeli passport when you go into the country and when you leave. Like my son-in-law, Oren, whose father's Israeli, and Oren's Israeli as well, when they go visit, he and Rena, he has his Israeli passport to go in and out of the country. So I said, don't speak Hebrew in the airport anymore. And so, I mean, if I'm pro-Israel, if you talk to Meira, she's way ahead of me. I mean, she would make Aliyah tomorrow if we could. The truth is, even if I won the lottery tomorrow and I had all that money, I still like so much what I do. I might send her there and go back and visit. But I love what I do. I'm not ready to retire. I'm not ready to stop being a rabbi. But most definitely, if I had the money, I probably would buy an apartment in Israel and every vacation for 4 weeks go and stay there. So anyway, Israel is so important to us. I believe, and I'll say this, you'll hear me say it a lot, that really, if you consider yourself to be a faithful Jew, the thing you have to do, not so much kashrut Shabbat, it's important, is go to Israel at least once in your life to visit, if not longer. You must go to Israel. You must. You must be there to see about the country, to see what it's like. First of all, it'll help you to withstand the terrible anti-Semitism and the Palestinian crap that goes on, with BDS and all of that. You understand what it really is, because you'll see Israelis, and you'll see good and bad. Israel is not a perfect place. It has problems. Certainly as conservative Jews, we know that. There's issues that we have. But the country itself is a miracle. And not just because economically it's doing very well, but because culturally it's Jewish. So yes, Israel is so important. My dream is to lead a trip to Israel with the congregation one day. That would be my culmination of a long-held dream of mine. So I know it was done. Actually, I heard from a friend, my friend Carrie Walensky, that she and Rabbi Saul did this once or twice before. Great idea, So anyway, Israel and myself, it's always important to me.
So I do have more questions to ask. I was just going to take a moment. If anyone had any questions in the audience, I'm happy to take them. I don't want to overlook anybody. Dr. Krevsky?
Hi, Rabbi.
Hi.
I have a question. I'm a member of the security committee for the synagogue, and one of the things that I'm concerned about is that the rabbi is trained and knows what to do, just like we just saw recently happening.
Yes.
Have you had training in active shooters?
I have not. And in fact, like many congregations, we brought that up at the next executive council meeting in our synagogue right after it happened. And I've been promised that the lay people are going to get someone in to train us before June. But if I don't, I'd be happy and I feel it'd be necessary to get me trained in such, It was obvious that the rabbi there who was trained really saved their lives. And so it's not even a question of if, but when. So yes, and I will let you know if I become the rabbi here and I get here and I haven't yet been trained, I will say, let's do something real quick before the holidays even to get me the training I need and with other members of the congregation, whatever it may be, to do this. Absolutely.
Would you be interested in joining the security committee to come and help us?
Yeah, absolutely. But I first want to get trained in what I need to do. I mean, I'm happy to join the committee. The closest I come to security is I have a cousin who's a member of TI in Ben Salem, first cousin who's a retired FBI agent. And we talk every once in a while, but we've never really, talked tachlis about training. But yeah, I would definitely do that. I mean, I need to. I think you have to demand it of the rabbi, literally. Yes.
And for those that are watching on the stream, the question, maybe they could tell from the answer, was about active shooter training. We secured a grant through our amazing executive director, of course, a few years ago after Tree of Life to help train staff, and we recently got another one, and we're going to be updating our training as well.
That's great.
So it's something we're certainly staying on top of. Any other questions from the folks here in the back?
Yeah, I was just wondering if you've done any type of spiritual programming and just thoughts on that. I'm not so religious, more spiritual, and trying to find a place for myself here.
Yes.
So the question for those at home was about spiritualism and a way to connect spiritually.
So, what I have done is textually based. I've studied the Zohar, and I sometimes teach classes in the Zohar in which we sort of a jumping point to talk about spirituality. Spirituality is a hard thing to define exactly. I spoke about this, I think, earlier in another session, perhaps, that spirituality to me, and I define it as relationship with God. Now, I'm of the belief, I do not believe in a supernatural God, which is a traditional belief. I believe in something that was taught to me by Rabbi Harold Kushner, who's a mentor and a friend of the family, and expressed most eloquently by Rabbi David Wolpe at Sinai Temple and other rabbis, that God is in relationships. That is, when you have relationships with people and you use Jewish values, that's where God is present. And from that is what I would call spirituality. So rather than any kind of, I mean, I'm not into Kabbalah. I like to study it to see meaning it has. In fact, I'll tell you a story, which I've told other people before, maybe not here. So when I was in Calgary, that was the big Kabbalah time. Madonna was into that, and everything. So I wrote a blurb for the adult education, sort of tongue-in-cheek. I read it later. I said, one of my classes is going to be in the Zohar and Kabbalah, and I said, all of your life questions will be answered. 150 people showed up. Half of them weren't Jewish. So I was embarrassed. I said, I'm really sorry. It was sort of tongue-in-cheek. Now, it's a great class. You'll learn a lot, but I can't promise that all your life questions will be answered. So eventually people dropped out. I had about 40 by the end, and we had a great time. And you know what? The Zohar basically says this, and it's something that is not very inclusive. It says, sure, you can embrace Kabbalah, but first you have to study the entire Talmud, the entire Bible. In other words, you have to be a rabbi or someone who knows. Now, I don't believe that's true. I think we can learn from it. Some of the Torah study I did today from someone like Aviva Zornberg, who is a wonderful, beautiful commentator on the Bible, incorporates that in terms of her commentary, the spirituality. We talked this morning about the garments of the Kohen, which, why are they so different looking? Because the clothes represent nature, represent universality, represent God's presence. And so the clothes themselves and all the accoutrements isn't just for pageantry. It's saying God is here with you, just like God's in nature, just like God is in each one of us. So that's my approach to spirituality. I don't do chanting. I have yet to learn yoga. I do want to learn it for flexibility, actually. But I approach it from the more academic or the more textual thing. But I do believe in something like a healing service, which you may want to call it spiritual. I think that's a very good thing to have. It's very common now in congregations, like once every couple of months. And, you have readings, you have, other things you do. That's wonderful. I think people need that, spiritual healing. And I've been a chaplain in many hospitals. I've been a chaplain in a state mental hospital of all places, and a very interesting experience there. I worked for the Board of Rabbis in Philly when I was at TI, like one afternoon a week in their hospice program. So I've dealt with those issues, and those days it was mostly AIDS, not AIDS from drug use or homosexuality. It was basically people who got infected with bad blood and developed AIDS from that. That was the people that we served. But nonetheless, so I have experience in that. And again, people come to me and say, Rabbi, I have a program, and here's what it looks like. I found it on the internet, or my cousin was at a synagogue. I said, well, give it to me. Let me take a look. And I say, why? I don't mind copying something that I think is good and people might like. I'll copy it. I have no pride whatsoever. I'll just copy it. I won't say it's mine. That I won't do, but I'll use it. So I like to learn from everyone.
Imitation is the sincerest form
Right,
of flattery,
right.
right? You mentioned a healing service. Have you led a healing service before?
I have done. Now, in New York, it was mostly the anniversary of 9/11, which was a combination commemoration and healing service, because I have a number of members. I can tell you stories if you want to hear stories for an hour, of at least 3 of my members who, because something happened, missed going to work that day and were spared. One was saying Kaddish for his father, and Minyan ran very late. Another one missed her bus, and someone else got called the last minute to go somewhere else. And all 3 of them may have perished at 9/11. So it's very deeply ingrained in and a lot in New York, in this congregation. So instead of just doing a commemoration, we did a healing service as part of that. It was very successful. And we did it on Zoom the last 2 years, obviously, and it still was very, very good. So yes, absolutely. I think that's a thing that we've learned. And I'll tell you something else. Everyone can learn. I'll be honest. When I first saw some of the what's it called? The Rav Zalman, and the stuff that he did with healing and with spirituality and the Kabbalah and that whole idea up at camps, in summer camps, I said, "Oh, what is this? It's like Narishkeit." And my wife, thank God, said, "No, what are you doing? Everyone has their own approach. Instead of criticizing it, look at what they're doing. Don't just gloss over it, and look at it carefully." I was a lot younger then, a lot more judgmental. And she was right. I mean, the stuff they were doing. Although I do have one funny story about Rav Zalman. If you know Rav Zalman, he used to live in Philadelphia, And the Rav Zalman came to Ramah one Shabbat, and his kapota, his Hasidic garb, looked like striped pajamas. In fact, one of the kids said, "Moish, why is that man walking around in his pajamas?" Because they didn't quite understand what he was doing. But there's a lot to learn from that as well. So again, to learn from everyone is a good thing.
Thank you. Any other questions here? Michael?
What do you feel is the most important role of a rabbi to a congregation, and what's your favorite part about being a congregational rabbi?
Okay, well, I think the most important role is something that was mentioned, to get to know the people and to be with them, to be present in their lives, especially at times that are important to them, not just life cycle events, but other times as well. I became a rabbi because I like people, okay? I like to learn of people's history. I like to be involved. I like to join people in happy, even sad times, and be part of their lives. And hopefully serve as a role model if I can. But that to me is the most fulfilling part. I mean, I love davening. I love teaching. And all the things I do as a rabbi, pastoral counseling and visiting the sick, all of that is important. And I really like that too. But the reason I became a rabbi is to get to know a group of people and to be involved. And in the 2 places where I was the longest, in Ben Salem and Calgary, each 10 years, that really did happen. We still have lifelong friends from both congregations, from the people in Ben Salem and from the people in Calgary. Because we were there the longest, we made connections with all the lives, even though Calgary, again, was a very large congregation, and it's been a great experience. So that, to me, in other words, what I guess I'm trying to say is, what Michael said is the congregation, that's exactly where I live. That's something that's important to me.
One thing in this community, Springfield Township is not a very good community, but the one thing that we've had for many years is our clergy was well known in the community amongst other clergy as well as being a part of it.
Right.
Whether it was something that happened at the high school, something that happened in the community, he was there.
Sure.
Where do you feel your role is as a rabbi in a congregation of, unlike Queens, you're in Queens, it's very Jewish, this area very not so Jewish.
Right. So again, I need a little direction in terms of connections with people in the school. If they want me to do an invocation, want me to talk to a group. I've done that for many, many years. I'm active in the community. I'll be a member of the Board of Rabbis. I'll be a member, if there's a local ministerium, I'll be a member of that. Always have gotten involved. I don't see my job as just being within the 4 walls of the synagogue, but with the community in general, and just to be there. And what helps in this situation is that I am known in the community already. Maybe not in this specific township, perhaps, But in terms of the Jewish community, everyone knows who I am because I not only served, in Ben Salem, I've been to Camp Ramah for many years, I was active in USY, and I have a lot of connections. But in terms of the community, the non-Jewish community, I certainly am willing and wanting to be part of that. And I would try to gain, and I would probably talk to Saul especially and find out from him, what groups I should look for, what ministerium, that sort of thing, because he's done that, he was there. He would be very helpful to me in that regard. So yes, it is important to me, absolutely.
Anyone else? Mrs. Krupski?
Rabbi Sachs, I'm sure you know that Jews are the most targeted minority for hate crimes in this country. In New York, last month, hate crimes against Jews up 300% compared to this time last year. In a high school in Alabama, a boy a teacher taught the students how to do Heil Hitler, and the Jewish boy who would refuse to do that was threatened. What do you think your role is regarding anti-Semitism, and also what do you think our congregation should be doing to try to combat and stand up against?
Well, there's
And
two
so,
ways.
Rabbi, if I can,
Oh, I'm sorry,
for
Gag, you
those at
wanna-
home,
yeah.
the question was about the rabbi's role, the congregation's role in combating anti-Semitism.
So, because we're in a large Jewish community, there are two answers to that. On a communal level, you have the JCRC, you have the ADL, so certainly any incident would be in consultation with them to get help to approach the problem. That's why you have those organizations, right? Even if it's right down the block. I mean, obviously, we're affected by it, and we have to deal with it, but that's why you have these organizations.
Rabbi, you don't even have to go down the block. We have the regional director of the ADL here in the
Hi,
congregation.
okay.
We're
Only 3 weeks in.
3 weeks in.
All right. Okay. So there you go, right? Not even down the block. Yeah. In terms, look, it's a tough question. I was one of those Jews who believed years ago, anti-Semitism, it's not that bad, we're being a little paranoid. But I, like everyone else, has changed their mind based on what's happened. It's not pretty. It's not good. So obviously, if it were a school issue, again, I would talk to the ADL or to the JCRC if something like that happened at a school, although I don't know the demographics of that story in Alabama, but I would suspect there are very few Jews in the school and there are very few Jews in the community. Could be wrong. I don't know. I have to look it up. So obviously, I don't want to make anti-Semitism a focal point of our existence. I'm afraid that, there's a very, very, very bad joke, which is not even worse today. The bad joke was they want more Jews to come to shul. Someone paints a swastika on the outside wall, and they all flock to shul. And that was a commentary on Jews being apathetic. Today, not only is it not funny, but it's not true. We have it in society. So, I don't think we should put our heads in the sand. I think we have to stand up for our rights. But I prefer whatever incidents occur, especially locally, even though I would definitely not ignore it and promote it. That's why it's important for the rabbi to make connections with the community. If you notice, the rabbi in Texas, he got such support from the imam of the local mosque and from the ministers of the local churches right away. They knew him. They weren't strangers. He was part of their group. So it was very natural for them to come out and say, this is terrible. We abhor this, right? And so that's why it's important for the rabbi to get involved in local clergy, to have allies, so to speak, when this happens. The same way that if I had friends with black clergy, African-American clergy, something were to happen to an African-American at church, I would be the first one in line to stand with them as well. So absolutely, it's crucial. And luckily, we live in a big enough community that we have these institutions, and we're not sort of out there on an island. When I was in Benton Harbor, Michigan, there wasn't really anything going on at the time, but it was in the middle of nowhere. And, problem.
So how do you address the apathy in American Jews? Because there is, and I would even put myself in that category at this point. There are days where I am more apathetic than other days in terms of wanting to be, coming to services or, things of that sort. So what
repeat the question?
It was, the question was about how to help people overcome apathy or to get more engaged in the congregation.
So the first thing I would do is say to you, if you act this way, you're going to burn in hell. That's all there is to it. And if that doesn't work, we joke about that, we rabbis, because if you talk to any of your Catholic friends, when they were in school as kids, that was what they were told, and they had the fear of God in them. It's a very good question. So there are two issues I think you have to face. One is just in terms of being Jewish, not necessarily coming to synagogue, right? How do you awaken your Jewish sensibilities? Well, unfortunately, anti-Semitism does that for you sometimes. Israel does it even better than anti-Semitism. You go to Israel, Birthright is the most amazing program that has ever been invented, because all these young people don't have much connection. They go to Israel, they say, wow, we Jews are doing something. We're so proud to be Jewish. So at the very least, it really ups your game, so to speak. In terms of synagogue, religious life, all we can do is say, look, we don't have all the answers, but we have a place you can ask questions. And we're a supportive community. We're willing to listen to you, willing to learn with you, willing to help you along your path if you want to go along a path. And it's a complicated question because it's got to come from you or from the person, let's say. I don't want to pick on you because we already know you're going to hell. I mean, that's just...
You can pick on them, it's fine, you can pick on them.
So that's what you have to do. You have to reach out and say, I'm here for you. And I think being pluralistic and being open to different expressions of Judaism helps as well, because not everyone looks at it the same way. There are certain standards we have to have, but by the same token, we have to be open to the community. We have to be a supportive community. And look, I get the sense just from meeting many of you over this weekend that you are a very cohesive bunch of people. A smaller congregation to be sure, but very much on the same page as a synagogue with what you like, what you don't like, and how you support each other. And that's just crucial. That really is crucial. And I'd love to be a part of that.
Sorry.
Good.
Rabbi, with the increased polarization these days, how would you guide the congregation through contentious political issues in society?
You had to ask me that.
Yes, I did,
Yeah, well, okay, so I have a policy. I do not speak about politics from the pulpit. Because I have an opinion. Why should I, if I give my opinion, then I'm going to ask Michael to come up and give his opinion, and you come up and give your, and we'll be here for 6 hours, right? So it's just not fair. I have the pulpit. I shouldn't use it to express personal opinion. What I will do is I will talk about something in politics, but from a Jewish point of view. Like, for example, immigration. I won't say, oh, they're bad, they're this, they're that. I'll say, we Jews are immigrants. We should support immigration. And I understand we're not going to talk specifics because there are issues. So in other words, if I talk about Trump, let's say, and people who know me know, I'm definitely not in favor of when he was president. But, and I had problems with him, with his personality. And I used to talk about that. Not about so much his policies, because his policies were like that of some Republicans, and you either agree or disagree. But some of his personal traits, and I wouldn't call him by name, but people would know. I say, we have leaders who exhibit this, this, and this. That's not healthy in any one of us, not just a political leader, right? So anyway, yeah, I don't speak about politics, and I don't even speak about Israeli politics a lot, except for, again, an issue of morality, whether it's the fact that we're discriminated against by the rabbinate in Israel, but I don't dwell on that. The truth is I've gotten so tired of it, it's just like, it's almost like flogging a dead horse. It's not going to change ever unless the whole system changes. But I do identify with the women of the wall, obviously, and things that happen there, and I'll call it out. But I ask people to think and to read, not just go online. I am a person who is an old-fashioned. I get the New York Times delivered to me every day, and the Inquirer, let's say. Inquirer I read for sports. But the Times I read, and there are times that sometimes what they have to say I don't agree with, but I find they're very factual. The Washington Post, Wall Street Journal. but I read actual newspapers. It's not easy, I just don't like reading it online unless I'm stuck somewhere and don't have a newspaper. But I tell people you have to be thoughtful, you have to think critically, right? I mean, I express anger and consternation of those who won't get vaccinated because it's been proven it endangers the whole community. Not that you may spread it or that yourself get sick, that's your responsibility, but that if you get sick and you clog up the hospitals, people who need the hospitals can't get in. So I speak from it as, I don't try to say, oh, they're evil, they're bad, and I don't even try to go in as to why they don't want to do it. You know, they're anti-vaxxers, they want personal freedom. Actually, I'll just give a little bit of a discourse here. Tom Friedman of the New York Times, who I really like a lot, he said in an op-ed this week, he said, you know, people talk about personal freedom, what about personal responsibility? And that's what Judaism, religion is all about, responsibility to community. Okay? Now, there is a conflict because we've been taught from the get-go here in America that we have personal freedom, which we do. But it's implied, but maybe not specifically enough, that we also have personal responsibility for our communities, for our general communities in general. And I think people confuse that with, oh, I want to be personally, free, and I want to be able to choose what I want to choose. So anyway, yeah, I do not talk about politics per se, but if I do talk about anything political, it's always from a Jewish. My whole approach to life, and I've told this before to other people. If I had a genie in a bottle and I opened up the bottle and the genie said, Rabbi Sachs, I give you one wish, what would you want? Well, I might ask for $1 million, maybe, but hopefully I wouldn't. I would say, I want every Jewish person in the world to live by Jewish values. Notice I didn't say keeping kosher, observing Shabbos. I think they're crucial. I think they help. But if you live by Jewish values, if you say, as a Jew, what would I do in this situation concerning social justice, concerning human relationships, concerning all the things that have a problem in the world would be better. We are a light unto the nations. We're not smarter than everybody. We're not better than anybody. But we have this tradition that is the oldest in Western society, Western civilization, that says we can share our enlightenment as moral people with the rest of the world. Not preach, not convert, not proselytize, but to say this is the Jewish approach. I wish more Jewish politicians would learn and say that, and say, I believe in this because, Bernie Sanders, who I think, means well, has himself barely studied anything of Jewish text. He would have so much more validity to a lot more people, I believe, if he studied Jewish text with a rabbi that he chose and say, you know what? I believe in this, but now I realize that what I believe in is also mentioned by the rabbis in texts about, helping people and good government and all of this. People cannot deny your intentions if you link it up with a religious philosophy. Not saying, you have to be religious to believe me, but that I have a vision of what should be from my religion that incorporates humanity as the most important thing we can do.
Do you provide, would you provide, like if you were to congregate the rabbi for our congregation,
Yeah.
would you provide classes specifically on what you just talked about?
Absolutely.
Jewish values and living a Jewish value as opposed to
Absolutely. Because, again, what I like to do, I know what I like to teach, but I can teach almost anything, but I like that as well. I need to, and that's why the parlor meetings are good sometimes. I say, what do you want to learn? I don't expect to hear, Mishnah, Talmud, Kabbalah. I expect to hear things like that. How do I live as a Jew? How do I do that? And there's an approach that we can use. Again, it's pluralistic. It's not like this is what you have to do and then you sign on the dotted line. But absolutely, because that to me, my father-in-law taught me this, and I never forget it. He said, the synagogue has to be the place where you become the best version of yourself through study, through prayer, through teaching, through socialization with congregants, and then you take that knowledge and you bring it outside. He thought it was, unfortunately, not good to be very Jewish in the synagogue, and again, I say Jewish, I don't mean religiously oriented, in the synagogue, but not bring those values out into the workplace, to your fellow workers. And again, I don't mean preaching, you're not gonna have many friends if you get up and say, all right, everybody, let's learn Torah today, and you have 18 non-Jews in your, in your office. They're gonna say, this guy's crazy. But if you bring those values with you, if you're a business person, and of course there's so many tales of people who are not like that, whether they're Jews or Christians or whomever, who don't do what their religion tells them. It's a problem. But absolutely, I'd love to do something like that.
Rabbi, let's we're gonna wrap up our interview
Sure.
here with a couple questions about you outside of the rabbinate,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
Sure.
I don't know if you like to cook, but if is there a meal you like to prepare if you're at home, or if people are coming over to your house?
Oh, thank God I'm married. I visited a colleague of mine when he was a young guy, before he was married, and I went into his house to say hello. His whole refrigerator, he had a Twinkie and a can of Tab. That was it. That image was seared into my brain. I am fortunate to have a loving wife who is a tremendous cook and baker. As I already told Val, I said, you have to hire me only because Meira makes killer rugelach. I mean, that's something you will miss if you don't hire me. I don't cook. I can do pasta. I can boil eggs. I can steam broccoli. I can make tuna fish and egg salad from scratch if I need to. That's about it. My role in the kitchen is to help and clean up, and I'm the sous chef. I cut up all the vegetables. My hobbies, I'm a big sports nut, which I think will fit right in with everybody here. I'm crazy about Philadelphia teams. I follow them all the time.
Who's your favorite Philadelphia athlete? Either maybe as a kid and as an adult?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
I'm trying to think who I never was asked that before.
You remember as a child kind of who you
Yeah,
looked
well,
up to?
Julius Erving really stands out, obviously, and he's a very fine human being too. And Mike Schmidt was always, I was a big fan of Mike Schmidt because he was such a great player. You're going to laugh, and you don't even know probably who this is. When I was in high school, I followed college basketball, and Penn had a great team. Corky Calhoun, Steve Bilski, Dave Wall, and I remember they would interview a lot of these student athletes from all these other colleges, and the guys, black and white, couldn't speak English to save their skin. Really looked not educated. Along comes Corky Calhoun interviewing him after a game, and he spoke like he was a member of the Supreme Court. I mean, I never forgot that. I was so impressed that he went to an Ivy League school, of course, and got educated, and that he was so well spoken, even though he was a jock. He was a great basketball player. So that was one of the things that I really remember. Not a professional player. He didn't make it into the pros, and I don't even know what he's doing now. But whatever it is, I'm sure he was successful at it. But I like sports, and I remember the championships when the Phillies, the Eagles was recent. The Flyers when they won their back-to-back cups in the 70s. The 76ers, with the Moses Malone. So one of the great things I look forward to if I come back to Philly is to go to games. I have to tell you one thing, however, that I will say. I probably will never go to an Eagles game unless I get the most expensive seats. I brought Ari, when we were in Ben Salem, Ari was about 10, to an Eagles game, a preseason. We sat all the way up top, where the guys there drank and pissed in the seats and cursed, and I was embarrassed for my son. And I
Is
said,
that the vet? Is that the old vet?
At the old vet, yeah. I said, never again will I go to a game unless I can get a suite or something. It was just terribly embarrassing. Hockey fans get rowdy, they yell at the players, but nothing like the Eagles fans. It's a whole culture, and I could give a sermon on that, actually, about the culture of the fans, especially the white fans, at the Eagles games and the tailgating. There's a whole culture there that's interesting. I love reading culture. I love looking at things like that, reading about it, observing it, and making some observations about different cultures in this country, no matter what they may be. But yeah, so I love sports. I follow sports. I like to play sports. I play basketball when I can. I used to play the JCCs, pickup games. At Ramah, we play baseball a lot. We played baseball. So those are I love to read. I read a lot of books. And like I said, I read 3 newspapers a day. I mean, it's
You wanna
amazing.
share with us, other than the Torah, maybe what your favorite book is, or the last book you
Favorite
read?
book, well,
Or the last one you read?
the last one I read was Obama's book about his years in the presidency. That was a very, very good book. I also am partial to science fiction and to mysteries. So we used to, when we were in Scranton, we used to schlep a lot into Philly and to New York to visit the kids, and we had all those audiobooks. So we listened every time. It was a 2 or 3 hour trip, and even coming today, we're listening to it's called The Daughters of Auschwitz. It's about the seamstresses who worked in Auschwitz. A very, very powerful book. So we always, Mira reads, actually she reads a lot. She has a Kindle and she reads all the time. And I read whenever I get a chance to read. I start my day each morning when I'm in the office by studying, by taking a text that I want to work on and look at, whether it's Maimonides or whether it's something in the Talmud or the Mishnah or the Midrash. But I like to look at texts, and then of course it's great with the internet today. I can sort of peruse and see what my colleagues are talking about, some new text that came out that I can read. So that's one thing good about the internet, the positive thing, that you can hook up that way and get some great ideas about what to read, what to look at, what to study.
All right, Rabbi. Well, thank you for joining us on BTBJ TV tonight, and for sharing some background. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you.
We should have had a commercial.
That's right, yeah. So we'll say bye to everyone in Streamland, and obviously welcome those that are in attendance to chat with Rabbi Sachs, and follow up if you have any other questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Oh, sure, my pleasure. Thanks so much, Mike.